just get into it right away, right now. I'm sure other people will be joining us immediately. Once again, you're welcome to this webinar. And strongly, I believe that it's a 1 hour seminar, webinar rather. And I'm sure that in 1 hour, we're going to get a whole lot of just okay. Okay, great. So we've had previous webinars, and I think we've looked at issues around elections before now. I think one of the issues that we have treated before now in one of the webinars that we had was the impact of elections on real estate values. Impact of elections. The elections are gone and the elections are over. The time for governance is just by the corner. Exactly in how many days? In 11 days, I will be having the new government sworn in. And I also recall that during the campaigns, not much was said by the political actors in terms of their agenda for the real estate and all that. But we felt that it's important for us to begin to set agenda in terms of real estate. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the speaker. The speaker is no other person, is no stranger. The speaker is Mr. Chudi Ubosi, the principal partner of Ubosi & Company. Mr. Chudi had experience in the real estate sector for over 3 decades, and he's been involved in so many activities for the state, for the federal, and all the governments generally. And I'm sure he's well poised. I don't want to bore you with his CVs to begin to read, because I'm sure we have quite a lot to discuss here this afternoon. So immediately I'm just going to bring in Mr. Chidi. But before I actually bring in Mr. Chidi, I want to set certain rules. Just in case you have questions, you can just drop your questions. We may have the privilege, depending on our timing, we have the privilege to allow 2 or 3 persons to ask direct questions, but please just write your questions, go to the question and answer area, drop in your questions, and I'm sure your questions will be answered. Right away, I want to bring Mr. Chidi, who is going to be talking on May 29, 2023, setting the real estate agenda for the new government. Mr. Chidi, you're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, and thank you for that introduction. This afternoon, we are going to be speaking about the new government coming in, and we're looking at setting a real estate agenda for them as they take the reins of governance in the next few days. The new administration, as we all know, is going to be headed by the president-elect, and at that time, from May 29, he will be the president, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Many of us, not just us, there are many expectations. There are many expectations from Nigerians, especially after the roller coaster thing we have gone through in the last 8 years. I'm sure that for a lot of people, the main focus, the main expectation will be that of economy. We know that he will tackle that, and we believe that he will, but there are other things. There are issues of security, there are issues of agriculture, there are the issues of foreign debt. A lot of us are wondering what our foreign debt profile is and how he intends to tackle them. This is against the background of the news, I think sometime early this week or late last week, of the outgoing government still trying to take in or borrow another $800 million. So that is there. There are the issues of public service reforms and so on. But I think for us, and for a lot of us, we are real estate oriented. For a lot of us, the focus is what is this new government going to do about housing. We want to focus on the expectations of the masses regarding housing, because this is key to the well-being of Nigerians. I mean, if we look at if we remember what Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about, housing is one of the very basic needs of the average of the human being. So for a lot of us, and for the fact that we know many Nigerians are underhoused. And as I go to my next slide, I'm going to take you through a bit of data, which will help me when we go into talking about our expectations. I'm going to take you through a bit of data. And it's primarily real estate data, and it gives you the realities. It talks or highlights for us the realities of the Nigerian real estate, not necessarily market, of Nigerian real estate economy and so on. First of all, we have a population in Nigeria of 223 million people. That figure is the United Nations figure from 2022. It's neither here nor there. They base these figures on the fact that we grow our population at an average of about 2.5% every year. So they have, based on the United Nations figures, we have a population of 223 million people. Nigeria has a size of 923,000 square kilometers. 923,000 square kilometers. Now, the main thing, I've not finished with that slide. The main thing is that less than 10% of that land, 923,000 square kilometers, less than 10% of it is titled. We have a housing stock of about 10.71 million housing units nationwide for a population of about 223 million. We have a housing deficit in Nigeria of about 17 million to 22 million. It depends on who you're talking to, it depends on what parameters are used, but on the average, we know the data indicates that there's a housing deficit, about 17 million to 22 million. Based on that, the country has an annual housing requirement. That is, on an average, every year, 700,000 houses need to be built. 700,000 units of accommodation need to be thrown into the market to be able to begin to reduce this housing deficit. But the data that we have indicates that less than 10,000 units of housing are built on an annual basis. Our urban population is on the average about 52.75%, which means that about half the population of about 223 million live in urban areas. The urban growth that we have is about 3.39%. Again, these are United Nations figures. Every year, the urban population grows by about 3.39%. And I'll put that in perspective for you. If we take Lagos, the capital of Nigeria, as an example, on a daily basis in Lagos, Lagos has a net inflow of 2,000 new people, a net inflow, which means that every day the population of Lagos grows by 2,000 people. So you can understand the density. And for those of us who live in Lagos, you can understand the traffic and the real population. When you look out of your window at any particular point in time, you can understand why there are so many people on the street. Other statistics, we have almost a total of absence of long-term cheap mortgage. Property purchase is on the average, when you want to buy, you spend about 100, you pay 100% cash compared to other countries where equity is between 5 to 10%. And then you spread your balance over 25 to 30 years. One big challenge we have here, and I just spoke about it, talking about urban population and so on, is that we don't have accurate data housing statistics. The minimum wage is under $100. Average house price in most urban areas is between 30 million to 80 million naira. Home ownership in Nigeria is low. Can I have the next slide, please? The next one. Home ownership in Nigeria is low. For every 1,000 people, only 23 of us own our homes. For every 1,000 Nigerians, only 23 of us own our homes. And you can see the data there compared to countries like the US, South Africa, and interestingly, even Kenya. This data is available from the United Nations and so on. And we had a little debate on this about using it, about the reality of it, but it's there. Kenya has 75% ownership rate. In terms of infrastructure, next slide. In terms of infrastructure, I wanted to give you this data. Nigeria has a road network totaling about 195,000 kilometers, of which 35%, 60,000 kilometers, are asphalted. Ghana has about 109,000 square kilometers of road network. 13% of it is asphalted. Kenya has about 177,000 kilometers of road network. Only 8% of it is asphalted. Now, I've put all this data down because this is what I'm going to use. This is what we're going to use in setting the agenda. But you know, with all these challenges, with all the data I have given you on the Nigerian real estate market, it doesn't all look gloomy. In all this, real estate still contributes about 5.64% to the Nigerian GDP on an annual basis. Real estate contributes 5.64% to the Nigerian GDP on an annual basis. And in setting this agenda, our belief is that if the incoming government, decides to take up some of the things that we're putting forward this morning, they will help unleash and unshackle a lot of the things that have held down real estate. Real estate has a big potential in this country. It is shackled down by all kinds of laws and so a lot of bureaucracy. It's held down, and our belief, and that's why we're coming up by saying we want to set an agenda. If some of these things are implemented, it will unleash not just the potential, but the entire value of real estate and the value chain that goes with real estate. So again, we look at setting the agenda. The incoming president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the private sector person, he's had very good stints in the public sector, as well as being the governor of Lagos and for 8 years, and the senator in the Third Republic. We're all optimistic because having been a public sector person, we believe that his experience will come to bear on his approach to the task ahead. And the truth about it is that we go back to the fact that we've had an 8-year tenure, which has been a roller coaster. We've had several recessions. We've had an economy that has not been allowed to breathe. There's so many things that were left undone, and so many things that were done that shouldn't have been done. And so we're hoping that as this new administration comes in, some of these things will be set right. And that's why we're saying that we believe that his experience as a private sector person will come to bear on his approach to the task ahead. Now, setting the agenda, one of the first things that needs to be done, is a review of the Land Use Act. You know, the Land Use Act of 1979 basically is a law that was set up, was put in place by the government at that time to control and manage the use of land for all Nigerians. The first thing is that it gave the power of administration of land to the state governors and the president. And so there are lots of things that need to be changed. This Land Use Act, this law is, as of today, 44 years old. It was made in 1979. The realities in 1979 compared to the realities of 2023 are very, very, very different. The dynamics are different. The economies have changed. There's so many things that need to be changed within that act. Access to land which has been vested in the state government should be looked at again. The issues of land acquisition and the compensation that should be paid, the power of revocation, Section 28 and 29 of the Land Use Act, the need for the government to give you consent to a land transaction. If I buy land today, I have to go back to the government to get a consent for my transaction. Section 21 and 22. I don't want to get too legal about it, but these are things that many people in government already know. There are many position papers that have been put forward. There are many communiques that are already in the government domain as to what needs to be done regarding the Land Use Act. It is not just that these things need to be done, they need to be very, very urgently done. And as they do that, hopefully they will begin to ease access to land title, they need to begin to ease access to obtaining title to land, and the requirements that many of us have to meet to enable us to have access to registered title for the properties that we already own. In fact, one of the major problems is that the governments have seen this issue, this thing about giving title to land, as a money-making venture, which it should not be. It should not be. And these are things that we're hoping that as the new administration come in place, they will give very critical look to it. It's this idea that before you get title to your land, you'll need to pay a huge sum of money. It will cost you an arm and a leg. That is one of the things that has made it has constrained a lot of Nigerians from going to obtain title to their land, and have continued to hold on to land based on traditional holdings and titles that are not legal, basically equitable interest. And when you have titles that are just equitable interest, you cannot do anything with your land. At this point in time, you are holding land that has value, but it is dead capital. This issue of debt capital is something that has been, again, espoused over and over again. There's the book called The Mystery of Capital, Hernandez Soto, talks about every one of us owning land. There's hardly any Nigerian who does not have land today. We all come from villages, we all come from towns, we all have a base, even though we live in the urban centers. If we go back to our homes and our land, our towns, we have land. But the reason why that land is useless to us is because it does not have title. So if the government eases access to title, many of these properties can be collateralized and the funds put into productive use. You can go to the bank, you can pick up a facility from the banks and use them for production and free the capital. You would have land, but unless that title is gotten, you have access, your land is basically dead capital. Again, with title to your land, you will ease, titled land will ease real estate transactions. It will reduce the number and the amount of fraud. It will increase real estate transactions. The main thing is that a lot of people are not involved in real estate transactions because of the fear of getting duped or getting into the hands of fraudulent people. But when people have title, when there's a clear title and it's visible and it's on paper, it makes it a lot easier to transact in real estate. And as people transact in real estate, amendments, the housing stock, which we're talking about, we need an average of about 700,000 houses every year. The housing stock will increase and it will help reduce the deficit. The next thing that we want to talk about in terms of setting an agenda is the issue of landlord and tenant laws in Nigeria. One of the biggest disincentives to real estate investment today are the laws governing landlord and tenant relationships. Many states have enacted their own laws on landlords and tenant relationship, and by and large, these laws are many times lopsided in favor of the tenants. Add this to the congested courts, the fact that a lot of the judges, the lawyers, the magistrates are very overworked, some of them sitting on 3,000-4,000 cases. It makes property and rent recovery a nightmare. And how does this become a disincentive to investment? If I put money in building a house, if I put money in building a property, I want to be able to enjoy my rents peacefully. But if at the end of the day, a tenant moves in there, pays me a couple of months or 1 year's rent, and I have to spend 5 years in court thereafter, trying to get my next rent or trying to evict him from the property, a real estate investment will no longer be a priority for me. I'll look for some other investment with less trouble to put my money into. So a review of the landlord and tenant laws in Nigeria is key. We're hoping that as this new government comes in, they will sit down with many of the state governments and review these laws and make them in such a way that that the laws are in such a way that not just do they favor the tenants, but they're balanced. They're balanced. Every day we sit down and we have debates on why should people pay 2-3 years rent in advance. This is one of the reasons why most landlords want to collect 2-3 years, sometimes 5 years rent in advance. Because it's the same, a tenant can move in and pay you 1 month's rent. One of the reasons, again, why this issue of monthly rent will find it difficult to work in Nigeria is the fact that a tenant can move in, pay you 1 month's rent, and then just stay put in your property for 2-3 years, whilst you go through the rigors in the courts trying to get him out. So there are many things about the review of the landlord and tenant laws. It's not just about favoring the landlord, but also to try and keep the tenants in check. So we hope that as this new administration comes in, a review of the landlord and tenant laws will be a priority. The third thing that we will look at is infrastructure requirements. I showed you when I was talking about some basic data regarding Nigerian real estate. I talked about the asphalted roads. The data shows that Nigeria has 30% of its roads asphalted. Kenya, 8%, maybe Ghana, 15% or so. But remember, our land size is 923,000 square kilometers. We're looking at a huge land mass. Many of these countries that we talk about can fit comfortably into one state in Nigeria. And our infrastructure needs are very, very, very key. We need to focus on roads. We need to focus on electricity. We need to focus on railways. We need to focus on sea transportation. The focus on infrastructure provision cannot be made any less. It has to be a priority for the new government, because these roads will enable the opening up of rural areas. And when the rural areas are indeed opened up, it will stem urban migration. In my earlier slide, I talked about urban migration at about 3.39%. Now, let me give you the correlation between urban migration and the pressure on housing. Urban migration is because, one, people migrate because they have no services, they have no infrastructure in the rural areas. So there's no electricity, there are no roads, there is very little security. And at the end of the day, there are no businesses that drive the local economies. And the reason why there are no businesses that drive the local economies is because if I set up a factory in a rural area, I have no roads, I have no transportation to evacuate my finished goods or bring in my raw materials, it increases my cost of production. So most industries, most productive centers are sited in the urban areas because a lot of them are already infrastructured, and it makes it easy to, at the end of the day, reduces the cost of production. So now, that's the reason why, please go back, that's the reason why urban migration is at 3.39%. Heavy. Now, when people come into the city on a daily basis, it puts pressure on urban housing. It puts pressure on accommodation. In Lagos, in most parts of Lagos, if you have a 3-bedroom flat today, you would easily have 20 to 30 people jostling to take up that accommodation. It means that there's a huge pressure on urban housing. And when there's a pressure on urban housing, what happens is that it goes to the highest bidder. It goes to the highest bidder. The highest bidder is who can pay the most, the highest rent. So all these things increase the cost of accommodation. When we worry about the cost of accommodation in the urban areas, this is the reason. It's a lack of infrastructure that pushes rural dwellers into the city that end up putting pressure on the accommodation that we have. I spoke earlier on about Lagos having a net inflow every day of 2,000 people. You can imagine the kind of pressure that puts even on their accommodation. And that explains to a certain extent why housing in Lagos is extremely expensive. Now we go on to the next one, the availability of long-term affordable mortgages. You would notice that I have used the word affordable mortgages. In today's markets, in today's real estate market and financial market in Nigeria, there are mortgages. There are indeed mortgages but I put those mortgages in inverted commas, open and closed, because a mortgage that comes to you at 23, 25% per annum, and it's for a 5-year tenure, sometimes even 2 or 3 year tenure, cannot be said to be a mortgage. Most mortgages that we know about come to you at about 2-3%, and therefore tenures of 20, 25 years, and sometimes even much longer. So we need a stable economy that will encourage savings. The government needs to create an enabling environment that will encourage production and will, at the end of the day, result in long-term affordable mortgages. An enabling environment provides savings. Savings provides the long-term pool funds for mortgages. The monies that you and I have in our bank accounts today, which is what the banks call money. Call money is money that anytime I go to the bank or I go to the ATM, if I have 10,000 in my account, I can pull out 10,000 and walk away. When I want my money, they have a right to give it to me. That's call money. That is not the kind of money that mortgages can be run on. Mortgages are run on savings. Now, do Nigerians have savings? It's a difficult question to answer. But 95% of the monies in the banks today are actually call money. So less than 5% of monies are available for long-term mortgages. And what that means is that the banks cannot give anybody long-term mortgages. The government needs to provide and work very hard to create this enabling environment so that we can begin to look at long-term mortgages to enable Nigerians own their own homes or invest in real estate. The fifth agenda is actually to look at what it costs, how we can look at building cheaper homes, a continued research into cheaper local building materials. I'll give you a current data that we have. As of December 2022, building a 4-bedroom detached house, gross floor area of about 275,000 square meters. Basic middle income house, average finishes, would come to you at about 58 million naira. The basic 4-bedroom detached house, the gross floor area of about 275 square meters. As of December 2022, it's about 58 million naira. This is excluding the value of the land. This figure excludes value of land. How many people can afford to build homes at 58 million naira? Look at what our, what's it called? The minimum wage is, and take it up from there. Less than 2% of Nigerians will be able to afford these homes. So there is a serious need, even though we know that the Nigerian Building and Road Research Institute are already doing a fair job in this area, but a lot more needs to be done. The research results need to be made public, and hopefully, with a review of the land use decree and access to land made cheaper, we'll be able to see cheaper homes. If you get cheaper materials, local materials, get cheaper and more accessible local materials, we should be able to begin to see cheaper homes in the long run. The next thing that we'll want to look at is the need for accurate housing data. As I begin to round up, the need for accurate housing data. Data is so important. And without data, as Nigerians, we'll continue to shoot in the dark. The reason why it seems as if so far we're not doing too badly in terms of housing production is because there's a huge backlog of excess demand. Accurate housing data is something that is indispensable. The government needs to have on available how the housing stock, the current housing stock. We have figures of about 10.71 million. There's a proposal this year for the Nigerian Population Commission to undertake a census, and in that census again, we will be able to, in the process, the housing stock will be counted. There's a need to count, determine the housing stock state by state, local government by local government, the type of housing in each local government, how many bungalows do you have, how many detached houses, how many flats, and so on and so forth. And not just that, we need to determine now who needs what are the needs in the various areas, and where are these houses needed. In Lagos, for example, what is needed? Do we need flats? Do we need bungalows? Do we need detached houses? There has to be a need for this data to be very well interpreted. And the reason why this is done so is that it will enable the government, direct and give incentives so that production of certain homes or certain types of accommodation and in the areas they are needed can be done. Apart from that, the data will enable planning, will enable zoning, because if we say, for example, we need, we need 3,000 three-bedroom flats in a particular area, and that area had been zoned maybe for industrial, the government can then rezone, knowing that there's a much more pressing need for residential. The government can rezone and make that area, rezone it to residential from commercial or industrial. So the production or the focus on getting some accurate data within the next 1 year that this new administration comes in is very, very key. And it will help in the fact that going forward, the impact that it will make on real estate will be felt by the time they begin to round up the first 4 years of their tenure. With that, I just begin to summarize that real estate in Nigeria is still very, very would I use the word undervalued, or would I usually like to use the word shackled. The real estate, I prefer to use the word shackled. It's held down by a lot of bureaucracy. It's held down by a lot of laws that have no place in modern society. And we started by talking about the Land Use Act and the need to have the act reviewed. The government needs to really, really, really focus on things that will unleash the potential and the value of real estate. Today, we're talking about a 5.6% contribution to the national GDP. I guarantee you that if some of these policies are put in place, within the next 4 years, real estate will begin to contribute as much as 10% to our national GDP. What we need, what eventually is needed, is a stable economy, the enabling environment, security, infrastructure, and real estate will take its rightful place in the national economy. It's our prayer, it's our wish that this incoming government will do the needful, and we wish them the very best as they take over the reins of government in a few days. Thank you very much for listening. God bless you all.
All right. Thank you so very much, Mr. Trudy. That was handful and very instructive as well. Thank you so very much. I mean, okay, I'm sure we'll have a few questions, about 2 questions already, but before we go into the questions, I also want to say, just in about 15 minutes, we'll be wrapping up. We will be giving maybe 2-3 persons the privilege. You may raise your hand and we may just promote you to panelists so that you can probably, make contributions, or probably if you want to ask questions, you may have that opportunity, so you can do that. You've spoken so well about the administration that is coming. I started also by saying, for the 3 contestants earlier on, there was no specific or clear-cut direction with regards to their plan, with regards to real estate, other than the fact that infrastructure, I think they all talked about infrastructure. And it was very instructive that you also did talk about this issue of infrastructure. You talked about the person coming in as a private sector driven person. And but let me quickly, whilst you're saying all of this, I looked at a few points. The point that has to do with the review of the Land Use Act, the review of the landlord and tenant laws of Nigeria and all that. I just want to quickly ask, or maybe will demand that you throw a bit more light into this, because I'm looking at how much can the government go or do in this regard, knowing fully well that these are legal, this require legal, they need to go to the House of Assembly, to pass the bill to repeal all these laws, and knowing fully well the kind of democracy that we practice, and the fact that at times it's just a 4-year term, and 4 years is just here by the corner. So I want you to expatiate, or probably throw a little more light. What do you think can be done, or how do you think these old issues that have been raised, how you think can navigate it alongside the legislature, the executive, and how they have to go back and forth in achieving this?
All right, thank you very much, Sunday. We know the process of reviewing the land use decree. I don't know whether we need to go that way again, but let me explain what the process is. The process is embedded, the land use decree is embedded in the constitution of the country. The process of making a constitutional change has to be passed at the 36 or 35 state assemblies of the country before it then becomes law or can take to the federal level. What we have is a democracy. The government knows that this country, one of the biggest changes, one of the biggest things that we need to do to allow this economy grow is to make a change with the land use decree. If they don't, even many of their own policies will not work. So the onus is on them. The onus is on the new government to begin the lobby of the governors of their party, the governors of the other parties. The onus is on them to begin that lobby. And the governors, once the governors get their buy-in, the governors can begin to lobby their own various state assemblies. This is politics, this is democracy. It should all be in the interest of the people. And so the incoming government, with all the trouble that it will face trying to change the land use decree, basically a constitutional amendment, must step out and begin the process. And we're not saying that it's going to be easy, but the Chinese say that the journey of 1,000 steps starts with 1 step forward. So they need to start it. I think the key thing is that the process needs to be started, and let's see how long it takes them to get it done. But it needs to be started, it needs to get done. If not, we will continue to have a real estate that is performing at less than 10-15% of its potential.
Okay, thank you so very much, sir. So let's look at the few. We have two questions here. Mr. Biodun, thank you. He's asking that, thank you for this opportunity to dialogue. What will you or how will you determine what low-cost housing is vis-a-vis the minimum wage and very difficult economic conditions? I think you talked about the minimum wage vis-a-vis the cost of housing the other time. So he's asking, what will you or how will you determine what low cost in housing is vis-a-vis the minimum wage and the very difficult economic conditions?
Okay, one of the things that we have been, I don't know whether to call it a fallacy. One of the things that we've been made to try to believe in Nigeria is that there is housing for all. When you talk about minimum wage and low-cost housing, it's difficult to relate them. But you see, when you have a good mortgage market, when you have a good mortgage industry, you have cheap and accessible local building materials, cheap, accessible local building materials. You have access to finance. You have access to finance. You have access to title to your land. You'll be amazed at what can be unleashed in terms of a lot more Nigerians having access to owning their own homes, in terms whether it is low income or whatever income you call it. Many of us in Nigeria today, what we do is, first of all, we buy land. Then we take a break. We rest. After we recover from the land purchase, we do a foundation. We rest. We put up block work. We rest. And that process goes on. And 5 years, 6 years, find that you have yourself a 3-bedroom bungalow. It may not be finished with marble and granite and gold, but you have a roof over your head. And usually the most important thing in all this is that it is your own. It belongs to you. You're not going to pay rent to anybody. And remember the saying that a man's home is his castle. It belongs to you. You don't owe anybody. You're not paying rent to anybody. So there's so much that can be achieved when we talk about housing and the role that government policies can help in making sure that many, many, many more of us can own our own homes. We may not be able to achieve 100% for everybody, but we can take that figure from the current 2 or 3 or 5% now to something as much as 70, 80%. It can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, so before I take the other question, at the back end, Angela, please, can you promote, we're going to be wrapping up. We have to do this in the next 10 minutes. Can you promote Chuka to panelists, because I'm seeing him raising his hand. But before he asks his question, I'm going to take another question we have before I call him to speak. But please, at the back end, can you promote Chuka Oroko to panelists so that he has the opportunity to ask the question? Sir, Dr. Agbato is saying, thank you, sir, for the beautiful presentation and insightful information. Considering the data on housing shortage you gave in the region of 17 million, the housing minister for works and housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, in his media briefing recently claimed that 17 million housing shortage is a ruse. What is your position on this view, sir?
Okay, thank you, Prof. We all listened to the minister, and I'm not sure that the minister, well, with all due respect, he has his own parameters for saying that the housing deficit is a ruse, because his own basis was that there are a lot of houses in our villages that are not occupied and so on and so forth. But I'm not sure if the housing minister was thinking that if I have my house that is unoccupied in the village, is there a housing demand in my village? Is there a demand for housing in my village to the point where my own house would come into play depending on the demand? I think that when we talk about this deficit, we need to begin to sometimes narrow it down to where there is demand. We know that the demand in Lagos, if my data statistics is right, the demand in Lagos for housing is about 3 million. I can't really verify. But one thing is clear, the demand in Lagos is much higher than the demand in Yola. The demand in Port Harcourt would be higher than the demand in one other state, in Bauchi, for example. So this issue of demand is location by location. And that is what adds up to what we are looking at about 17 million. Most of the demand is in the urban areas. Most of this demand is in the urban areas. And let me explain a little further what this demand is made up of. If you have your child who has left school and has graduated, he's 25, he works in a company and he earns 200,000-300,000 every month. And he cannot move out of home because he cannot afford accommodation. That child is part of the housing deficit, because there should be housing, there should be some type of accommodation that should be able to cater for his own need. And that's why in my presentation I talked about understanding what we need in terms of housing. I said, look, we need to determine what we need. How many one-bedroom flats? How many two-bedroom flats? How many three-bedroom flats? How many detached houses? You and I know today, luckily we're in the same profession, Prof. We know what development goes on in the Lekki stretch. Most of it are luxury end developments. And yes, people buy. But we also know that based on the pyramid of demand, the major demand for accommodation today is the 1, 2, 3 bedrooms that is at the bottom of the pyramid, which people are looking for in terms of hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So the minister may have his parameters. I wouldn't say that I disagree with him, but we in the industry have a different perspective to this, and we believe that the houses in the villages and some of the ones that are locked up in Abuja do not exactly come into play. They might be counted as part of our housing stock, but they are not in play in terms of accommodation for those who need them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So quickly, in 1 minute, Mr. Chuka, please can you take your comments so that we have additional 4 or 5 questions, and we have to do this snappy because we are already running out of time. But please, Mr. Chuka, please can you take your comments quickly in 1 minute so that we just move on to the other questions.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I have a question, not a comment instead.
Great. Yes. Go ahead, sir.
Yes. I want to take you, Chudi, quickly back to the manifesto presented on housing by the president-elect. An aspect of that manifesto says that he is good when he is elected, as he has been elected, we believe he's been elected, that he's coming in to collapse or to merge all the federal government housing agencies into one bigger entity and then recapitalize it. Then the question is, given Nigeria's debt profile at the moment, how do you think this recapitalization agenda is going to happen? And if we were to be an advisor to him on housing, what would you tell him in this respect?
Okay, thank you very much. I think, yes, I've heard that as one of the policies that the president-elect said he would bring in. But, I think the first thing is I don't know if he has undertaken a study of what each and every one of these agencies do. They have different roles. There's the Federal Housing FHA. There is the Nigerian Building Research Institute. There is the Federal Mortgage Finance. There are all kinds of agencies. There's the Nigerian Mortgage and MRC. So there are all kinds of agencies. They all play different roles. What about even those who allocate land? What about those who allocate land? So they all play different roles. It would become, in my opinion, a major, what's the word for it? It will become a major behemoth. It will be too large. It will be too large to manage if it is put under one corporation. But again, he must have his model that he wants to run. He must have his plans for housing. So we await him, but I think that marginal all of them might not exactly achieve the objective. If my advice was sought, I would immediately, first of all, say, look, have a major review of what is going on in each and every one of those agencies and set targets, set objectives, set deadlines, clearly defined objectives and deadlines, and put timelines to these things. The way we operate in the private sector, the way things are done in the private sector, I know you probably have a deadline to produce a report tomorrow. You're not going to produce it next week because you have a deadline and there's a consequence for not producing your report on time. So we need to institute some of this private sector approach to business. We need to impute them into a lot of things that the government, the public sector does for better results. So I don't think that a lot of those organizations and parastatals have a problem. It's primarily their approach to business that is different from what obtains in the private sector. And then in terms of our debt profile, well, we have statistics and data that says I think 97% of our income was used to pay debts, has been used to service our debts, not just pay, just to service the debts this year. It's a huge sum. There's no doubt that being a private sector person, there's going to be a tough time. There will be tough times ahead for every one of us, Chuka.
Yes.
There are definitely indications that things like the subsidy will go. The government needs money to be able to carry out a lot of the policies and the plans that they have. These monies will have to come from somewhere. Hopefully, or nicely, the price of oil has been moving up in the last few weeks. I expect a lot more taxation. Being a private sector person, I expect that the president will look a lot more inwards towards internally generated revenue. Hopefully and prayerfully, it will not be centered on those who are already in the tax net. Hope and belief and prayer that they will widen this net. I know certainly that in this country, less than the figure we have is less than 10 million people pay tax in the entire country. Less than 10 million people are in the tax net in this entire country of 220 million, where we have about 65% of that figure within the working age group between 18 years and 65 years. Make up about 50% of that figure of 200 million. Yet only 10 million people pay tax. So let's see what happens. Again, like we say, we wish him the best. We also need him to put in his best and move this country forward. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Chuka. Sir, we are running out of time, and I can see we have a whole lot of questions here, and we have to deal with them. So you have to help us to handle this question. Also, I'll read Chuka Wankboy said, great presentation. It says with the cost of developing a standard 4-bedroom bungalow, just like you said in your presentation, and considering the minimum wage in Nigeria, how will citizens be able to own housing through mortgage? I think you have said something about this, but you may want to just say you have said something while answering the question earlier on, but maybe you just want to chip in quickly on this, sir.
Okay, I had said that how will people be able to own houses? How would you be able to get a mortgage? A mortgage is extremely very difficult. Most banks tell you that what they're giving you is a mortgage. A mortgage of 23%. As of 2 days ago, yes, I asked, it's about 23%. Payable over 2-3 years. That is not a mortgage. So you have to be working in one of the blue chips, and I don't want to mention oil companies, telecoms, for you to be able to afford that kind of a mortgage. But how do you own your own housing? We've talked about, hopefully, with the government introducing a lot of these policies that we have been talking about, cheaper land, titling, amendments to the land use decree, research on building and lowering the cost of materials, training of labor, and so on. Hopefully, things will become a lot cheaper and a lot easier to access. Title to the land so that you can collateralize your document and be able to take money out of it and turn it from dead capital and have funds for it. So what we're hoping is that if the government comes and begins just the process of starting these things, we would see major leaps in the real estate market. For now, I still believe that one of the ways of getting into the real estate, getting into the real estate ladder, is to get your land. And gradually, like I've said, many of us do. You buy the land, you put your fence, you put your foundation, you put your block wall, and over 2, 3, 4 years, funds from your secular, from the work you do, borrowed funds from friends, gifts, and so on. 4 or 5 years, you should be able to have something small on ground. And that for now is about the easiest, if it's about one of the major routes into owning real estate.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Abiodun Adeboye is asking here that how can the government further tap into the revenue potential of the property market in a friendly way? How can the government further tap into the revenue potential of the property market in a friendly way?
The revenue of the property market in
a friendly way. How can the government?
Friendly way? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Adeboye, that's a very good, and that's actually a very nice question, because today what we see is a lot of aggression. They come at you with land use charge, and you're wondering, what exactly am I paying this for? I provide all my services, I provide security, I provide water, I provide my road, I provide everything. The government comes at you when you're building. They come at you with land planning approval charges and all kinds of costs and levies and so on. Basically, let me put it this way: the government itself needs to start with a major orientation of Nigerians. And it doesn't just, it's not just about the real estate market. It's also about the totality of how government deals with Nigerians. It's almost as if governance is adversarial. The word I like to use is that governance in this country is adversarial. You are dealing with an enemy. So you pull out your knife, you pull out your sword, I pull out my sword, and we are fighting each other on every step. Government itself needs to reorientate Nigerians in terms of the fact that, look, we're here, we're government, we're here for you, we're here to service you. We've gone through decades and decades of governance where Nigerians don't even trust anything about government. So the first reaction to any government policy is, these guys have come again. These guys have come again. So there's a need for a total reorientation. And that's why I'm saying, that's why I started from this perspective of the totality of governance and its relationship with Nigeria. There's a need for a total reorientation. Now, once that reorientation comes in, and we can see that government and the people are partners in progress. Government must see the people, and people must see government as partners in progress. Once we can achieve that, then it becomes a lot easier for me to pay my land use charge. If I get home and there's electricity, my refuse has been taken away, the street lights are on, the street has been swept, my road is asphalted, there's security. There's absolutely no reason I don't spend half my annual or monthly salary buying diesel so I can have 2-3 hours of electricity every day. We would begin to see and appreciate the need to pay these monies, and we would do them happily. We'll begin to appreciate the need to pay planning approvals and so on and so forth. So the only way really to do this in a friendly manner is to start off with the orientation and the fact that what government says they will do it, and it will be visibly seen. If the government says, I'm going to asphalt your road today, they will do it. And they will do it transparently, with integrity, and with accountability. And that way people will buy into them and believe in it, and then it becomes a partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, sir. Okay, we have 3 more questions. Our time.
Okay.
Really I want to apologize. I mean, of course, this is very interesting. Okay. I mean, yes. Okay. So, this anonymous attendee is saying, I understand that the tenancy law is more friendly to tenants than property owners, and the reason for this is because the government wants to use that to mitigate the shortfall in housing. However, this law is now working against its mission by discouraging many from investing in real estate rental investment. Do you agree? And what is the way forward?
Yes, I said it in my presentation. I totally agree, 100%. The landlord and tenancy law has become a big disincentive to housing. I'm not sure that it was done to incentivize, to ensure that people develop more houses. No, I think that the law was made in favor of tenants because at that time, there was a need to protect tenants from difficult and shy landlords. But now we have a situation where we have very weak institutions. We have the courts that are full of litigation. And at the end of the day, what we have are tenants who sometimes move into properties, pay you 1 year's rent or 1 month's rent or 6 months rent, and then you can't get any more rent from them, and you cannot evict them from the property. So I totally agree with you. What is the way forward? I think I said it earlier in my presentation, the landlord and tenant laws need to be reviewed to make it possible for a landlord to evict a tenant who is not paying him rent as quickly as possible. If not, we will continue to have a situation where investments are taken away from real estate and put in other investments that are less troublesome and possibly even yielding more. Many of us know that if you put your money, one easy investment, especially for the elderly today, is fixed deposits. You have a property that is worth 100 million naira, you're collecting 5 million naira as rent or something, which is a 5% return. And then you have the fixed deposit investments that pay you 12%, 11%, 10%, stress-free. I know many landlords who do this, and every month the bank just credits their accounts with something like a monthly dividend, and they live off that stress-free. They're not chasing any tenants, they're not writing anybody, they're not involving any lawyers, there are no estate agents or facility managers to worry and hold meetings about. So the key thing is that these landlord and tenant laws need to be reviewed and balanced in such a way that both parties can get justice whenever they want to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chudi. I'm thinking we don't have to deny people. I can see that there are two persons who wants to make comment or ask question, but I'll give them time. But we have two more questions from the chat group. I want to quickly do justice to this while we give these other guys 1 minute. I mean, once again, I want to apologize for pushing you to do this. I mean, in terms of, and also the people also on this, but we just have to answer this question. Ajikobi Alex O is saying, wonderful and very insightful presentation. What will happen to the real estate investment choice by investors when majority already have their own houses? And what effect will this turn around have on residential property market? I hope you got that, sir.
No, I didn't get that.
He is saying, what will happen to the real estate investment choice by investors when majority already have their own houses? And what effect will this turnaround have on residential property markets?
Okay, I think he's looking at that from a very short-term perspective. The real estate market in Nigeria, you talked about, he's mentioned real estate investment trusts. Did I hear real estate investment trust?
No, residential housing, no, sir.
Residential housing is one major area. I'll take it. I'll take that. Residential housing is one major area where there is a shortage. I can assure you that if we have a 10 million deficit, 9.5 million is residential housing. It's not. There's never going to be a time when you will say that everybody has their own house, because every year people are graduating from the universities. Every year people are moving up in life. Every year, somebody gets married, he needs to move from a 1-room or 1-bedroom flat to the bigger house, a 3-bedroom flat, or from a 3-bedroom flat, he now has 4 or 5 children and so on. So he needs to move into a wing of duplex and so on. So the fact is that there will always be demand. There will always be demand for housing. There will always be demand for residential housing. And when that demand becomes even excessive, we will then begin to see more and more vertical developments. You know, when you go to a place like Yaba, which is in Lagos, and you see all those bungalows, a time will come when Yaba will be filled with vertical development. When I'm talking about vertical developments, I'm saying it will no longer be worthwhile for you to put up a block of 2 or 3 flats, or a block of 6 flats, or a single building. You would need to go 10, 12, 15 stories high, because there'll be a demand for it, and there'll be a capacity to pay for those kind of things. And anyway, the value of the land would make it impossible for you to do anything less. But bottom line is that at the end of the day, there will always be, as long as there is life, as long as there is economy, there is progress, there is development, there will always be demand for residential accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So Mr. Biodun Jogunla is lending his voice to the answer you gave earlier on. He's saying, I think what the incoming government can do as regards to the many agencies in the housing sector is to constitute a committee where all the heads of the different agencies can meet, maybe quarterly, headed by the Minister for Housing, to discuss and harmonize their various operations to meet the country housing needs. I mean, it's just making comment with you. You said something about this earlier on when somebody asked this question. He's offering his own advice. What do you think about this comment Mr. Biodun Jogunla is making?
It's very, very right about it. Look, we know that one of the major challenges we have is that in the public sector, people, not much, I wouldn't say that not much is achieved, but in the public sector, they're not as driven as people in the private sector. We need those parastatals, those organizations to be driven in a private sector model. And I can assure you that in that way, they will achieve every objective and every target that has been set for them. So I totally agree with you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Whilst we're wrapping up, like I said earlier on, I wouldn't want people who will raise their hands. Ugochukwu, Esther, or Carol, can you make your comments in 1 minute so that we can wrap up and also give the other person, Ugochukwu, Esther, or Carol, if you can unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question. Are you there? Okay, we don't have time to waste. So let's go on to Mr. Benchika, right? Let's Mr. Benjamin. Let's have you take your comments or questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to appreciate Trudy. He actually owned this presentation. He's done so very well. And we are talking about the incoming government. We all hear right now that there are so many meetings going on in France. I guess at this point in time, to make these things work out, we need professionals and not party members. If we need to advise them, somebody like Trudy should be the Minister of Housing and things like that, to have these noble ideas he has put forward come to fruition. It will not work if they go to anywhere to satisfy one people or the other, and goes back to what it used to be. So if there's anything like this, I guess we should also communicate to them that we need to take charge so that these things will work out the way we have heard today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Trudy. Nice one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Ben.
Ben,
I was going to say that, Mr. Trudy, I was going to say that now talking about minister, I was just laughing here. But again,
yes,
it made some vital comments. But in terms of what he's saying, and I think that what I pick from what he's saying before I allow you to make comment on it is the need for us to have this engagement. I mean, for us to constantly on the front burner, speaking with the right persons. I mean, not just as individuals or as an organization, but as an institution, we must begin to put forward to say this is the agenda that we think that we should set for the incoming government, and we should begin to lend our voices. I mean, so let me hear your take on that, then we'll begin to wrap up in 2 minutes.
I agree with Benchika. I totally agree with him. I'm not agreeing that I want to be Minister of Housing. Far from it. I can assure you that I am not. But I agree with him that the professionals should be brought in. Whatever is going on in Paris, we don't know, and as much as possible, the professionals should be brought into play, because there's so much to be done. There's so much to be done. And 4 years, we always look at 4 years as a lot of time, but there's so much to be done. 4 years will go in no time. And these guys just need to make an impact. They need to make an impact. Nigerians are suffering in the area of housing. They're suffering in the area of real estate. They're suffering in the area of infrastructure. We all know what housing is, apart from the fact that housing for us in Nigeria, or from the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is key. In Nigeria, you're not taken seriously until you can show that you own a property. If your town, your village, wherever you come from, you're not taken seriously until you can show that you own a property. If I wanted to run for office today, the first thing they will ask me that I should start from the village. And when you get to the village, they will ask you, where is your house? Where is your father's house? Where's your real estate? Because that's the only way they know that you have a footprint there, and you use that as a foundation. So we hope that the right professionals will be put in place to be able to get these policies and agendas set up. And yet again, we keep using the word unleash and unshackle real estate and unleash its potentials. Let it take its rightful place in the country, in the economy, and in our lives. Thank you.
What a right or fine place to leave or to end this webinar. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chidi, for the presentation. We're excited, and I believe strongly that from the conversation, from the comments, from the questions, we can see that truly it's an insightful presentation. Thank you once again. And for all the participants, I mean, we took a bit of your time. Usually it should be a 1 hour program, but we extended even a little more than that. And of course, this is basically due to the fact that it's an interesting topic and we need to talk about it, and we need to actually attend to all of the questions. So we want to appreciate your patience. We want to appreciate the fact that you joined this meeting. And I can see on this platform our senior colleagues, a whole lot of them. I don't want to begin to mention names. Everybody on this platform, you're very important. We appreciate your coming. We appreciate your patience and the fact that you stayed through till the end. Thank you very much. And for every one of us who had registered, you can be sure that the presentation will be sent to our emails. Both the audio and also the PowerPoint presentation will be sent to us so that we can actually take a whole look at them again. This is usually brought to us by Bosele & Co. We felt that there's a need for us to deepen conversation in respect to real estate. And we're sure that in the next couple of weeks, next month also, you'll be having another webinar, which will be inviting you all to join us so that we can have this conversation and make our contribution to the real estate sector at large. So once again, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you the next time. And like I said, as soon as this is over, we're going to send all the presentations to you. Mr. Chidi, thank you once again for doing this with us. And we pray that the Lord continue to bless and increase you greatly in Jesus' name. So on this note, I want to say thank you all for coming. And I'm bringing this webinar to a close. My name is Olusanjo Fawole, and I'm your host on this webinar. God bless you and have a wonderful and fruitful day.